Yeah. How'd you wait for me?
The Senate will come to order. Senator Gazelka.
Mr. President, I move that Senate File Number 1 be taken from the table.
On that motion, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. We will take a brief pause to gather the votes of the members in alternate locations.
I think, Indira? I think she's merging them into one, Carrie said. So, we'll be here for now, but
Had a nice, interesting conversation with John Hoffman. It's actually reasonably well. The first one in like a year. So his be very explicit when I read the No, it's not.
Receiving a sufficient number of aye votes, the motion prevails. Senator Gazelka.
Thank you, Mr. President. Pursuant to Rule 26, I designate that Senate File Number 1 be made for special orders for immediate consideration.
Members, the bill up for consideration is Senate File 1. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Over the last few weeks, Minnesota has had a number of news stories that has really got us reeling in our homes. It started with the arrest and detention of George Floyd, and it resulted on that first day with his death. A death that was caused by an arrest that went tragically wrong. It not only was tragic, it was brutish and very troubling. It's an event that I personally don't want to see on our newscasts ever again. And I'm sure that the rest of the public in Minnesota also agrees with me as well. Since then, a number of pieces of legislation have been written to address police accountability. Both chambers and both political parties have written bills trying to prevent that type of an event from ever happening again. I wish I could say it wouldn't happen again. I don't believe that simply writing a bill stops all bad events in our lives. However, it's good to at least have an account of what our existing law, how it responded to that event. Under existing law, the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, which has authority to investigate the Minneapolis Police Department for civil rights violations. That has occurred, and I believe prosecution will result in that investigation. And through court order, the Minneapolis Police Department is required to implement immediate changes such as banning chokeholds and making timely discipline decisions. Under existing law, Hennepin County District Court judge agreed for preliminary injunctive relief regarding the Human Rights Commission action. Under existing law, Attorney General Keith Ellison has been assigned to investigate and prosecute the officers involved in the death of George Floyd. Charges have been filed, charges have been upgraded, and also under existing law, the U.S. Department of Justice has begun its own investigation regarding human rights violations by the city of Minneapolis and its police department. It's important to realize that we do have existing law, and the existing law is doing exactly what it's intended to do, to prosecute when there is a suspect of wrongdoing and illegal behavior. Our job today is to consider a number of the proposals that we will be bringing forward. The first bill that I have is Senate File Number 1. It involves enhancement of law enforcement training. But in addition, this afternoon, we will be also looking on how to help police officers deal with stress and traumatic experiences after they experience things like post-traumatic stress syndrome or disorder, when they see countless events come up to circumstances that are hard to fathom even by a toughened, hardened law enforcement mind. We're also going to be expanding background checks for employees of law enforcement, employees, not law enforcement officers, but those who work in the administration of law enforcement. We want to improve the quality, and we want to make sure we know who's working in those agencies. In addition, we will be talking about mandatory reporting of deadly force incidences, bringing uniformity to the BCA, banning chokeholds and neck restraints through uniform policy on use of force, requiring a duty to intervene and report for officers when they are involved on the scene of an excessive force incident, and finally, instructing officers to preserve what is now being called the sanctity of life as it applies toward law enforcement and how they deal with very complicated physical challenges on their job. Having said that, I want to focus our attention on Senate File Number 1. Senate File Number 1 involves funding of law enforcement training. It's a unique grouping of law enforcement training that we started in 2017. Back in 2017, the legislature, as well as the Governor, Mark Dayton, worked together to enact a law mandating law enforcement training requirements. I want to be clear, law enforcement officers are required right now to complete 48 total hours of mandatory training for every licensing cycle. Current policies and training requirements include training for identifying and responding to crimes of bias, training in the use of force, including deadly force, training for community policing, training in fire response and arson awareness, a policy for peace officers' standards of conduct is in existing training, training for vehicle pursuits, policies and training on avoiding racial profiling, and newly passed in 2017, issues involving conflict management, crisis intervention, implicit bias. Since January of 2018, however, all full-time and part-time peace officers must participate in 16 hours of mandatory training on topics of, and this is what we put into the law a few short years ago, crisis intervention, mental illness crisis, conflict management and mediation, and recognizing and valuing community diversity and cultural differences, to include implicit bias training. As part of the 2017 public safety package that went into effect in 2018, the state agreed to appropriate additional money for law enforcement training as a result of those statutory mandates. Prior to 2017, the cost of state reimbursement was $3 million per year, statewide, which is part of the base already and still in effect, and it will continue to remain in place. But since July of 2017, the state's annual reimbursement has been $9 million per year. That's over a almost 200% increase due to our legislative actions focusing on some of those training topics that we talked about. Back then, it was vitally important to get ahead of the game. We began to notice that training was missing in law enforcement professionalism, and we tried to plug that hole as soon as we could. However, it was a 4-year sunset on that funding program. At the end of next year, that money will expire. If you want to continue professional law enforcement training, I believe we need to extend that funding, and that's what this bill does. We're making our commitment 1 year earlier. Originally, the funding, like I said, the funding level was enacted for only 4 years. I think in spite of despite what we've seen in the news clippings in the last 2 to 3 weeks, I would hope that you would agree that funding is absolutely needed for law enforcement more than any other time in Minnesota history. Senate File 1 makes the 2017 appropriation permanent in our state reimbursements to law enforcement training. That doesn't mean that that's the only training. Individual law enforcement agencies can add to it in their own separate departments. But this is the baseline for all of Minnesota. There are many other budget decisions going on right now. We understand that, whether it's due to COVID-19 wreaking havoc on our economy or what our state budget picture looks like. But I'm sure this issue will be fully discussed even further as we continue during this special session. We have to start somewhere during this special session, and I believe this is a good baseline to start from. The Senate file is before you, and I will stand for any questions.
Discussion on Senate File 1. Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Limmer, for starting the discussion that we have been on a journey of trying to transform not only public safety, but also equity in our state of Minnesota. We are here to take action, and while I do appreciate supporting our police, I think we all know the hard work that a lot of our departments across our state were engaged in. We certainly know that funding is not going to solve the issues that we've witnessed in the last several weeks. I do appreciate that there is talk about reforming some of the training requirement, and as you listed, Senator Limmer, you talked a lot about the proposals that you're going to be talking about today and moving forward today as in response to the civil unrest and the killing and the murder of George Floyd. You talk about enhancement of post board. You talk about stress relief for officers. You talk about expanding background checks of administrative employees in law enforcement. You talk about mandatory reporting. You talk about the BCA. You talk about banning neck choke and neck restraints, a duty to intervene, and then preserving the sanctity of life. Nowhere in that discussion did I hear about the public involvement. The public who really was completely distraught by what they witnessed that happened in our state. Nowhere do I see in the proposals, and maybe I'll be enlightened as we go through them, but not at first glance, of what Minnesotans want and expect from us as taxpayers that fund our public safety. We recognize that they're an important fabric of our fundamental government, but they are also needing to hear from the public who funds them, because we wouldn't be here in this chamber if it not for the taxpayers of the state. So, Mr. President and Senator Limmer, I hope we can talk about how you expect the changes that need to require to be change in our state to involve our public, involve the communities of color that are impacted disproportionately by some of what we witnessed in the last few weeks. So I don't believe this is enough, but I do have an amendment that would hopefully start taking that into consideration in the future policies that we talk about today. And with that, Mr. Chair, I want to move Amendment A1.
Senator Franzen offers the A1 amendment. The secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Franzen moves to amend Senate File Number 1 as follows, page 1F, before line 6, insert, this is the A1 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Franzen.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Limmer, this is a simple amendment. It simply adds to the Police Officer Standards and Training Board 2 more members of the public to be part of what the training looks like, to be part of what the decision-making of licensure and all the different aspects that the Post Board is going to be doing with those additional $6 million that you are moving forward. And with those $6 million, 2 more members of the public that can help have an audit and accountability for our Post Board. Much of what happens across our state when it comes to police departments is dictated by the Post Board. So that is a critical part that the legislature has all the authority to change and transform. 2 members of the public is not asking for a lot. These 2 members would be in addition to the already 2 members appointed by the governor from among the general public. It's just another voice in our public transparency of what our police officers and our public safety system in Minnesota should also be accountable to. So I stand for questions, Mr. President and Senator Limmer, but I hope you accept this as a friendly amendment.
Discussion on the A1 amendment. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Franzen, I'm looking over this amendment. I was wondering, I have a technical question for you. Would the author of the amendment yield?
Senator Franzen will yield. Senator Limmer.
I see on line 1.6, your proposal is increasing the members by 2 members, but on line, oh, I see what, never mind. I've always been deficient in math. Thank you. As everyone knows, or maybe they don't know, the governor is the one who appoints members to the Post Board. If you have a long run, for 8 years, you have a very dominant philosophic approach, perhaps. We try, I'm sure every governor, including Governor Walz, would want to have a balanced approach. I see that, I know that it has been told to me that it's rather law enforcement heavy. And so, Senator Franzen, I will accept your amendment as a friendly amendment.
Further discussion on the A1 amendment. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. We'll take a brief pause to gather the votes of the members in alternate locations. Receiving a sufficient number of aye votes, the motion prevails. The amendment is adopted. Next on the list, I have Senator Ralph. I have Senator Ralph followed by Senator Herr. Senator Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to take a moment here to reflect on what we're about this afternoon. I think this bill is a fine start to what we're trying to accomplish, but I want to look at the broader picture for a moment. Training does work, but it has to be backed up with other things. And I want to take a moment to look at what has been happening in my community of St. Cloud and the surrounding area. Since 2005, St. Cloud has had a community policing agreement that has set forth standards, ideas, and things that the administration and the police are going to do with and towards the community in general. That has been amended a couple of times, and it is in effect right now. Our police department has used training to give their officers skills in dealing with the community, that sanctity of life we talked about. Our department has had an outreach program for many, many years, including what is called Cop House, which was a house in one of the higher crime areas of St. Cloud that was converted into a community center with police, medical, social services, and other services available. They started reaching out to the community. They had full-time officers there devoted. They were assigned to that particular location so the people in the community there got to know them. Just as a note, it has been so successful that they have actually been able to reduce the number of full-time officers that are staffing it, and it is mostly serves now as a community outreach location rather than a site for law enforcement. In addition, the St. Cloud Police is using the Vitals program. For those of you who do not know what this is, it is an app that is on a cell phone and that people with mental health issues, primarily autism, can sign up for, and when a peace officer is within 80 feet of that individual, they will get an alert on the phone. So that peace officers, when they're coming into a situation, know that we may have a situation here that we need a behavioral specialist, or we need someone who can understand and deal with the issue that's dealing with. And I bring this up because this morning we heard a very impassioned testimony from a woman whose son was autistic and was unfortunately killed by the police. So this is another example of what is actually being done, and I refer to Senator Limmer saying there are many things already in place. My plea is we take advantage of those things. I'm going to go on a little further because this is important with respect to what's going on now. In addition to the Vitals program, the St. Cloud Police has been working for several years to try to develop a methodology for allowing mental health behavioral specialists to be embedded in the actual police department and to actually go on calls that involve mental health. They had to work out the issues involving the safety of the parties involved, the safety of the behavioral specialists, and they have now implemented this program, and it has been running for several months. Wildly successful. They have cut down the number of visits. They have cut down the emergency room visits. They have cut down the number of incarcerations. Again, these are programs that exist and work. The officers have spent years and years and years building community relations. Are they perfect? No. But I can assure you, in talking with members of the community, that it has had a huge impact on our community. I want to turn a little bit to, many of you know that St. Cloud has experienced a couple of incidents the last couple of nights, and people are saying, oh wow, your stuff doesn't work very well. Well, I want to talk about those incidents and how well this stuff works. 2 nights ago, there was a call involving an individual either brandishing or carrying a firearm at a convenience store. The police responded, the individual ran, and they sought to arrest him. They caught him. They did not use their weapons. One of the peace officers was shot in the hand. They did not fire back. Their training in de-escalation and in work towards that helped defuse a situation that could have turned into an incident of deadly force, and it did not. Unfortunately, on social media, several people either tweeted or put on Facebook that 2 minority individuals had been shot by the St. Cloud Police Department. This was patently false. A crowd gathered. There was some civil disobedience, and there was some rock throwing. They approached the police department. They were asked to disperse and then told to disperse, and then they were dispersed using chemical agents. No one was injured. 4 people were arrested. The incident did not go any further. Again, the training and the professionalism of the peace officers involved kept this from turning into a much, much, much more serious incident. The next morning, at a news conference, the chief of police, the mayor of St. Cloud, the director of the NAACP, and one of the black faith leaders in our community, a very respected pastor on the south side, had a news conference. They all praised the behavior of the police department and supported it. This is part of the results of good community relations that St. Cloud has been working on. Fast forward, last night, there was a call about individuals shooting at each other near a convenience store in south part of St. Cloud. There was a peace officer patrol just across the street who responded. The individuals dispersed, they ran, but almost immediately a crowd gathered. The crowd began throwing rocks, breaking into the liquor store across the street, setting fires, and chanting and refusing to disperse. Again, as this crowd gathered, the director of the NAACP appeared with the father of the person who shot the police officer last night, the night before, and begged the crowd to disperse. The crowd refused. In fact, started shooting at each other and into the neighborhood and at the police. The police brought in extra forces and restored order. There were numerous arrests, and these people will be charged. But after about 2 hours, everything was peaceful. I go in detail on this because I want people to understand that the proposal we have here for the post board, and thank you, Senator Franson. I think that it's excellent that we expand that board so that it has more community input. I think this is going to be important. But I think it's more important that we actually take this post board and turn it, support it, because its training does work. But it only works when it's done in conjunction with the police departments and the administrations of the cities that they're in, support that training, and then follow through with it through continual exercises, through outreach, and through programs that develop positive community relations. So I'm going to speak in general because there are many proposals that we will listen to today that will seek to improve upon and take forward models that work. And we have one right here in Minnesota. And I have long been a champion of our police department and have spoken on other times saying that the model that the former chief of police and our current chief of police, Blair Anderson, have carried through should be something that we should be looking at throughout Minnesota and throughout the United States, because it is proof that we can do the right thing and that we can do it without a massive overhaul of how police and law enforcement operate. We have that model. We have that ability. Now, is our work done? No. Should we forget about the horrific things that happened to George Floyd? No. More importantly, should we look wider within ourselves and to the community to begin to try to understand what is actually going on. I am not a minority. I cannot put myself in the shoes of a person in the minority who has had to deal with abuse, racism, and mistreatment at the hands of the police and, quite frankly, a good part of society. But as an individual with a sensitivity and an ability to believe in people, I can be sensitive to, respond to, and be a positive force for trying to bring together people so that we can feel safe. We can feel that, boy, there's somebody breaking into my house. I better call the police because they can help me. And I can do that safely. I firmly believe that if we pass the legislation that we're working on today, and much of it will have, you will find things that have been recommended by the other body and by the board that studied this, that it is a starting point to go forward. We must not forget, we must not just simply do this and put it on the shelf. We must actively work with those reforms, help our cities, help the communities, help our city councils to understand what it is we actually need. So, in closing, I would like to say that thank you, Senator Limmer. Thank you for the people on the Judiciary Committee. Thank you for the people in the other body that have had enough passion as well to take what has been a horrific incident and turn it into an opportunity for change. Thank you very much.
Next on the list, I have Senator Herr, followed by Senator Hayden. Senator Hayden, followed by Senator Herr.
Well, thank
Senator
you,
Hayden.
Mr. President, and I'll be brief. I think Senator Herr has an amendment. I was compelled to listen to Senator Ralph hailing from St. Cloud, and he said some things about his police chief and the work that he has been doing with community. He also said that I assume that the NAACP president is probably a black person, as that's usually what happens. I know that Chief Blair Anderson is a black person, and the communities that they think he was referring to were a lot of black communities. And so I think that one of the things that I would hope, and though Senator Ralph isn't a black person, is that he recognizes is that it was black people in that community that is having the conversation with each other to make sure that the community is engaged. That is one of the things that I feel like in this body we haven't done very well. So we will make an assessment as we go along with Senator Limmer's bills and where he derived them from, Attorney General and the Commissioner of Public Safety's recommendations, or the other body and their caucus, but there hasn't been a lot of engagement here. And so I just wanted to tie that together, that is, we start to talk about what we want to do and what we're going to do here today, that it is even in his town, in the place that he represents, it seems like leadership in the black community has been successful, if I take him at his word, which I will because he's an honorable person. So I just want to set the tone as we go through the rest of the afternoon, that people of color and African American black people have the ability to kind of come together with our allies and to fashion a series of bills and amendments to those bills that we think is going to be good for Minnesota, since we are the ones that usually disproportionately are the victims of this police misconduct. So I would hope that as we start moving forward and we give our speeches, and if we got to give them at third reading or in between, that we would keep in mind that even in, and I was glad to hear Senator Ralph, but even in his mentioning of that, I think that without being explicit, but implicit, and if you look and take a look at who he's talking about, those were black people.
Next on the list is Senator Herr.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank Senator Limmer for accepting Senator Franson's amendment to add members of the community to the post board. Also, very much appreciate Senator Hayden had clarified that if we're going to make change, it has to be from the people of color. And I hope that this body will listen to us, will listen to the leadership of Senator Hayden, and dictate by the people of color and the indigenous folks. With that, I have an amendment, Amendment A2.
Senator Herr offers the A2 amendment. The secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Herr moves to amend Senate File Number 1 as follows, page 1, before line 6, insert. This is the A2 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Herr.
Mr. President, the Senate File 1 is about training and budgeting. So the Section 1, my amendment, on Section 1 of my amendment talks about prohibiting warrior-style training. It defines what warrior-style training is, and we're abolishing warrior-style training. The second section is about training in crisis response, conflict management, and cultural diversity. Crisis intervention and mental illness crisis training should meet the standard with minimum of 4 hours for crisis intervention and mental illness crisis training. And then there's subdivision 1 and 2, which talk about record keeping of the training provided. Section 3 talk about autism training, very similar to the mental health section as I just mentioned, and the requirement is very much the same. And the following Section 5 and 6 are the designation of dollars, $200,000 each. And I think this is just a small carving of the $6 million that we put into Senate File Number 1. So, Mr. President and Senator Lemon, I ask for your support, and Member Senate for your support of the amendment. And
discussion on the A2 amendment. Senator Dietzick.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Herr, for bringing this amendment forward. In committee this morning, we heard several very compelling testimony, and we heard from several people in the autism community. We heard from a mom, and I don't know if I'm going to apologize. I don't know if I'm going to get her name right. It's Amity Dimmock. I hope I'm saying that right. Her son was, I believe, an African American who was having an episode, and I believe at the grandparents' house, and the grandparents called police for help. And unfortunately, he was killed by the police. She had talked about before that they had called the police before, and some comments have been made that they would probably be back, and they hoped they wouldn't have to be back. They hope they never had to come back if the person killed his grandparents. And the mom said the police knew, and I had had conversations with them, that he wasn't a threat to others, he was a threat to himself. Probably 4 years ago, there was an incident in the Met Transit in St. Paul where a younger African-American male who has autism, was having an episode in crisis, and police came up to deal with him, and he was basically beaten because he was having a crisis. And I don't know if he was not verbal, but he could not respond to their commands, and so they viewed that as either flippant or threatening, and so unfortunately he was attacked. And so we've had this autism training bill off and on for a few years to get additional training. And I think that Senator Hurd's bill for $200,000 out of the $6 million is not unreasonable. I think that if we look back to what the original bill said, it did talk about de-escalation training, it talked about crisis training, it talked about conflict management and cultural diversity, and I think this is just another piece in that we need to look at. How are we better training the police? I think a lot of police are very well trained. Unfortunately, I think there are some people who they can take all the training they want, but if you don't want to be trained, then it's not helping. But I still think we need to be offering it. I think we need to be focusing more, and I think the Post Board is going to be looking at making some changes internally and looking at what some of their policies are and how to get up to speed for their best practices. And I think as part of that, they might look at, you know, what maybe we should be focused on more, just a few trainings instead of a lot of trainings. And I would hope they keep this one under consideration. But I don't think Senator Hurd's amendment is unreasonable. I think it gets to the gist of what that original $6 million was for. I think it comes in handy. I think some of you maybe, I know those on the Judiciary Committee probably received a letter from the Minnesota Business Partnership earlier this week, and they actually support some of the proposals from the A.G. Ellison and Department of Public Safety Harrington's work group that has done the past year that looked at deadly use of force and incidents involving police officers. I believe Senator Ingebrigtsen was on that committee. And in that package that the Business Partnership encourages us to act, they say we need to do some things. They actually include in their list of policy recommendations that they think we should consider, increase state-provided law enforcement training funds where appropriate. And I think this $6 million goes a long way. Increase police training on interactions with African Americans and people of color. Increase police training on interactions with people with disabilities and people experiencing a mental health crisis during interactions with law enforcement. I think that truly helps. In my conversations with law enforcement and with parents of children with disabilities, and especially autism, they are terrified. If you have a kid that's a runner, so your kid has autism and they just like to run and they can disappear like that, you panic because you don't know where this kid is going to run into, and they're cute when they're running around and they're 6, but when all of a sudden they're 16 and they're big and they just run, and you might not recognize them because you haven't seen them for a few years, but they all of a sudden run into your yard, then it's scary for that person, and then that person is in crisis, and then the police come and just makes it worse. And so the St. Paul police have said there are things that, again, and I believe the mom said, there are things that you can do and that police should be able to pick up cues to help better handle and deal with those people that are in crisis. And so I think this training goes a long way, and I think this bill goes a long way, and so I am supportive of the bill. Thank you, Senator Hurd, for bringing it forward, and I would urge a yes vote on this amendment.
I have Senator
Mr.
Benson on
President?
the list, followed by Senator Limmer. Senator Benson.
I would like to move that the amendment as presented is not germane under 35.2, paragraph 2. It's intended to accomplish a substantially different purpose. It is more expansive than the language that was brought to us. It also increases the appropriation significantly. It's additive. It doesn't adjust the $6 million. It takes additional funds from the general fund, and while it might be a good idea, it is substantially different than the language that Senator Limmer brought to the floor.
Senator Benson is challenging the germaneness of the A2 amendment. Advice, Senator Dietzich.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I don't know if we can do an amendment on the floor, on the fly, but the money, the $200,000 times 3 was actually supposed to not come from the general fund. It was supposed to be appropriated from the $6 million that is already being reallocated in Senate File 1. And so of that $6 million that is allocated in the bill, we're just saying and asking that $200,000 of that $6 million go towards police and mental health crisis team collaboration, police officer crisis intervention and mental health crisis training, and I believe autism training. And so,
Mr. President, We
Hold
are.
on, Senator Benson, hold on. Right now, we have a question of germaneness on the floor, so we can't offer an amendment at this time, but I am taking advice from the floor on the germaneness ruling. So advice, Senator Dietzich, further advice?
I would argue that it is training, and the bill is training, and the underlying bill is dealing with training. And so we are just saying of that training that is in the underlying bill, we're asking you to use some of that money for these specific purposes, which were included in part of the original 2017 bill, said here we want you to look at these training programs.
Further advice, Senator Benson?
Thank you, Mr. President. And again, these might be good ideas, but they are significant policy changes from what is in the underlying bill, not to the entire penumbra of the section of law that the bill pertains to. And so it significantly expands the scope of the bill as it was brought to the floor. That is the only determination that we are being asked to make. It is not on the merits of the materials in the amendment. It does expand the scope of the bill that was brought to the floor and therefore is not germane.
Senator Herr.
Mr. President, I'd like to withdraw this amendment and for time to redraft and represent it again.
Okay, so Senator Benson will withdraw her point of order, and Senator Herr will withdraw the A2 amendment. So now, members, we are back on Senate File 1 as amended. Further discussion. Senator Johnson, I had you on my list, but I believe it was to the amendment. Okay, so I do not have anyone on the list. Is there any further discussion? Senator Dibble.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Spend a little time here so that Senator Herr can get his amendment in order and to the floor. But I just wanted to respond and expand on some of the points that Senator Hayden and Senator Dietzich have made. I appreciate Senator Limmer's bill. Certainly training is discussed quite a bit as something that's important and necessary for police. And, you know, to have $6 million a year to support and strengthen law enforcement training and implement best practices is a positive thing. However, it is just $6 million. And we've already seen in Minneapolis, believe it or not, quite a bit of effort devoted to improving, updating, modernizing, implementing best practices around training, as well as a number of other measures that have been designed to prevent the kinds of incidents we saw on Memorial Day. And what the community is telling us is those efforts haven't borne fruit, that training is well and fine, but we need so much more. And we need better systems of accountability, of expectation, of leadership, of cultural change, you know, of true, authentic community engagement and partnership, so that the decisions that are affecting their lives are ones that are made in consultation with communities, with the Black community in Minneapolis, with communities of color, with indigenous communities, with the immigrant community, with the LGBTQ community. And we have a fantastic chief of police, Mario Arredondo, Rondo he's called. And he's been working very, very hard. But still something isn't quite working out. What is that? Do we know? Have we asked? Have we developed these bills in partnership, in conjunction, in conversation with those communities? Well, if you're wondering what that is, what those things are, just take a look at the raft of bills that have been introduced by Senator Champion, Senator Hayden, Senator Torres-Ray, Senator Herr, Senator Franzen, because those bills have been done in a collaborative fashion, in partnership and relationship and conversation with those communities from Minneapolis, from St. Paul, and beyond. So, there's nothing to dislike about advancing $6 million to support and strengthen law enforcement training and implementing best practices. But the question really does beg, why haven't body cameras changed the picture? Why hasn't implementation of procedural justice changed the picture? Why do we hear that when we see a murder in cold blood on video camera, we hear that the only difference is that we saw it on camera? And even on camera, the police report filed was false. The truth wasn't contained in that incident report, and it had to be amended. And in fact, the police spokesman was embarrassed and had to backtrack his original comments about what exactly happened. What are those things that aren't working for folks? It's very easy. Let's just simply ask for some partnership, some true, authentic relationship with communities. As people know, I've had a number of police reform, a series of police reform bills. I didn't just make them up off the top of my head and introduce them and decide that all things would flow, all good things would flow. I did that in deep, deep conversation over the course of several years after the death of Jamar Clark and Philando Castile. We go to the people whose lived experience tells them and then can tell us what the solutions are that are best in their lives. That's how we work best as elected representatives. That's how we function best as a chamber. And so that's what I would ask all of us to think about in the screen or the prism through which we look at this whole series of bills that are coming forward. Who are the authors? Who are the co-authors? And how did those bills get drafted and come about and become represented as the sweeping criminal justice reform that was promised at the outset of this session when Senator Hayden put that challenge, that existential challenge to us. How are we going to respond to George Floyd and his murder? And we were promised sweeping change. But all done, of course, not in conversation with Senator Champion or Senator Hayden or Senator Franson or Senator Herr or Senator Torres-Ray. It was just kind of announced and rolled out in a Republican press conference, in a Republican-controlled hearing. So, Senator Limmer, this is great, this is well and fine, but I'm still waiting for sweeping reform. And I'm still waiting for that reform that the community brings to us that they want us to talk about and debate in this chamber. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator Torres-Ray.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, members. I think that it is very important that we offer some context to the work that we are trying to do here today. Because the public may not know this, but I think Senator Limmer and members of both caucuses actually know this. The Posse Caucus, which are the people of color and indigenous members of the House and the Senate, work for a number of days putting together a package of reforms. And that package was given a long hearing in the House where we heard testimony from experts in the community. That bill was not given a hearing in the Minnesota Senate. So members of this body and members of the public did not have an opportunity to provide that input to the Minnesota Senate. So the public is confused as to why the Senate did not even give us an opportunity to hear that bill, to hear that language, and to give experts in the community the opportunity to tell us what they think about that bill. That opportunity was not afforded to us. Because of that, we are offering amendments to bills that come from members of the majority caucus today. Many of us were not included in those conversations. As a matter of fact, I do not believe that any members of the Posse Caucus were ever invited to have a conversation, formal or informal, about the bills proposed by the majority today. We were just given that language, and we're being asked to support you. Members, what you need to know is that there have been many African American representatives and senators who have worked on these issues for decades. They have worked on these issues because this is personal to them. And I think you have heard the testimonies of our African American senators, African American representatives, who have talked about their experiences with law enforcement and how they fear that their children are not going to have these positive experiences, how their children are in fear after they watch this video that the entire country and the world watched just a few days ago. We need to change this, and you know that. But today, we're being asked to vote on several bills that are really not significant policy changes. And it is hard for me to really accept that some of the significant changes that the Posse Caucus put together for all of us are not adequate. I cannot, in good conscience today, understand why. Why is that you are not giving us an opportunity to have those hearings and to take a vote? You must do that. And finally, before I offer my amendment, I have to tell you this. In our caucus, we put a committee that includes all the people of color in our caucus and attorneys that combined have about 50 years of experience in dealing with policy. Senator Franson, who is an attorney, is part of our committee. Senator Champion, who is an attorney, is part of our committee. Senator Latz, who is the leading Democrat in judiciary, is an attorney. So please do not tell me that these amendments are not germane. Please don't. Because we have people who actually have experience from a legal perspective as well as process. And so we know that these amendments that we're offering today are actually germane. Please don't use the process that way to insult our ability and capacity to manage this process. With that, I would like to offer the A4 amendment, Mr. President and members.
Senator Torres offers the A4 amendment.
Thank you.
Senator Torres, we don't have the A4 amendment at the desk.
I think that the staff just took it. I don't know if it was Was it renumbered?
Just give us a moment, Senator Torres. We're trying to.
Yes, thank you.
Trying to find it here.
My apologies. I think it was renumbered. It's the 825 amendment. Thank you.
Senator Torres offers the A25 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Torres moves to amend Senate File Number 1 as follows, page 1 after line 6. Insert, this is the A25 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Torres.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members. So to be clear on the issue of germaneness to this particular bill, that amendment is being placed in the Senate File Number 1, line 111, which speaks about best practices, just to make clear. So when we talk about best practices, Mr. President and members of the Senate, what I would like to offer in the 825 amendment is an opportunity to look at best practices from a community-led public safety coordination perspective. This is an opportunity to really change the practices that we currently implement in law enforcement. In this particular amendment, we ask that we establish a community-led public safety coordination office of justice programs. The Commissioner of Public Safety will appoint the coordinator who will serve in an unclassified position and will perform the following duties. He will promote and monitor alternatives to traditional policing models. The office will identify forms of community-led intervention to promote public safety. He will strengthen connections between community members and law enforcement agencies, encourage the use of restorative justice programs, included but not limited to sentencing circles. And it will administer grants to promote co-responder models of crisis intervention and promote community healing. The bill goes on to explain how these processes will actually work and how they will be funded. So again, Mr. President and community members, the idea here is that we will actually look into new ways, alternative ways, innovative ways of public law enforcement. When we talk about what do we need to do in the future, we're talking about exploring ways of reestablishing trust and connections between our communities and law enforcement officers. We understand that some communities are already working on this, and we applaud those efforts. We want that to continue. And when we talk about training, we want to make sure that those trainings are valued, that those trainings are shared with, amongst cities and different localities. So this is an opportunity for us not only to think in different terms, but also to make sure that the current practices that are valued and supported by communities are actually understood and shared with others. This is a great opportunity for us, members and Mr. President, and I ask for your support, and I ask you to think outside the box, because that's what we need to do today as the entire country and the world actually is looking at Minnesota for a new direction. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, members.
Senator Benson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask for a ruling on the germaneness of this amendment under 35.2, especially paragraphs 1 and 2. It is not related to the post board. So substantially different subject and a substantially different purpose, expanding provisions that are not just related to the bill that was brought to the floor. And again, this is a narrowly construed bill, and it is not a question of the intelligence or capability of the author of the amendment. It's a question of, is it germane to this bill? And this bill has to do with $6 million to the post board for existing training. This is considerably beyond the role of the post board and a significant amount of money. And I would ask you to rule it not germane.
Senator Benson raises a point of order on germaneness. Advice for the President. Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to give advice, and I think Senator Torres-Ray, as she opened up her presentation of this amendment, encapsulated it best. The bill speaks to law enforcement training and implementation of best practices, and we see a best practice that goes under the heading of community-led public safety coordination and community-led public safety grants. And it has been shown that if we turn to the community and use community energy and knowledge and expertise to do things like promote alternatives to traditional models, effective forms of community-led interventions that promote public safety, strengthen connections between the community and local law enforcement, encourage restorative justice, and also create co-responder models of crisis intervention. That's bringing mental health professionals and social workers and other kinds of professionals along to help deliver the kind of response that particular incident might necessitate. Clearly a best practice that expands and improves and promotes public safety, which is the true goal, of course, of our law enforcement and policing systems, or should be our true goal of our law enforcement and policing systems in our community. So, Mr. President, I would urge you to find this amendment germane to Senate File Number 1. Thank you.
Further advice, Senator Kiffmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, in taking a look at this, I would support the motion to find that this amendment is not germane. This underlying bill, Senate File 1, has 4 short lines, of which there are 3 words having to do with best practices, implementing them. But clearly those 4 lines are regarding peace officer training assistance. It is about assistance. The amendment itself is 3 pages of new language, clearly way beyond the scope. And the topic of this bill in particular is about assistance, the $6 million being made permanent every year and not reverting to 0 in the future. So I would support Senator Benson's motion.
Further advice, Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. And so I would rise to oppose Senator Benson's point of germaneness. Mr. President, this is about best practices. So it starts to define who gets to define who best practices are. So we said in our previous comments, my previous comments, and Senator Torres Ray eloquently talked about the PLCI caucus. Senator Franzen is a member of the PLCI caucus, senator and an attorney. Senator Champion is a member of the PLCI caucus. Other members of the Judiciary Committee who's long-term, who have been working on this for a long time. So the idea that this wouldn't be germane, that we're having members of the PLCI caucus on behalf of the communities that are at the brunt of this police misconduct, and we say this is how we'd like to be able to see best practices laid out, as opposed to the Post Board. If the Post Board, with all due respect, had done all the things that they could do as it relates to communities, we wouldn't be in this predicament now. So, Mr. President, with all due respect to Senator Benson, I would suggest that we find her point of order not well taken, and that we would continue to move forward to see if the body would like to add this to the bill, which I think is a really good amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further advice, Senator Torres Ray.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. And furthermore, in terms of really trying to understand what is that we're trying to accomplish, I think it's absolutely essential that we understand that we are providing in this bill, Senate File 1, $6 million to basically do more of what we have been doing. And that's what is just so problematic for me, Mr. President. It is precisely what we're trying to tell you, that we need to change the way we do business today, because far too many African American men and Native people and people of color have died in the hands of law enforcement, implementing the practices that we have today. That is what we are trying to do, and this is what we're trying to tell you, that these practices actually need to change. As a matter of fact, we recognize, and in the hearings in the House, many law enforcement officers came to tell us that they do want to change these practices. They also want to change these practices, and we have many law enforcement officers that want to move in this direction. And here we are saying, here, you have $6 million more to continue to do the same thing. How can we come here and say that? How can we do that? So what we're trying to say right now is that these practices, these best practices that are defined in here, for which you are providing more funding for, simply do not work. And we are trying to tell you, Mr. President and members, that we have a set of practices that are guided by research and have been approved in other states and have been so well received by many, many law enforcement officers that these practices actually work. So we're trying to enhance we're trying to enhance this policy by saying, when you adopt this funding for best practices in the future, we want to make sure that we define what that is. And that is to encourage restorative justice programs, administer grants to promote co-responder models, that we strengthen connections between community members and local enforcement agencies. I mean, this is the core essential change that we want to provide here, Mr. President and members. So we're asking for your support precisely to do that. And this is an opportunity that you should take. I encourage you to vote for this and really understand that germanance is not an issue here.
Members, just a reminder that we're on the point of order of germaneness, not on the merits of the amendment. I have several members that want to give me advice, including Senator Limmer and Senator Franzen, Senator Johnson. I'm not sure if he's on the list or not. Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I'd like to bring your attention to the original bill, Senate File Number 1. It's got 1.5 lines, not 3 pages of new legislation to create a new bureaucracy in a new office. Mr. President, I agree that this amendment is non-germane. The original bill simply extends funding after 4 years, and it continues it. That's all the bill does. But the amendment, Mr. President, creates an Office of Community-Led Public Safety Coordination. It lists its duties. It lists public safety grants. It hires a safety coordinator. It grants to promote community healing, community coach certification. Clearly, Mr. President, this goes way beyond the scope of the original bill, and it is non-germane.
All right, further advice. I've received a lot of good advice. Senator Franzen. Further advice.
Mr. President, Minnesotans are watching. They're watching what's happening in this chamber and in Minnesota at this point in time. It is not the time to be playing with rules and not debating the ideas that come from this body. So yes, maybe we intentionally had a bill, to Senator Limmer's point, that's only 12 lines, which the bulk of it, I can read it for the public to understand exactly what this bill does. And I quote, $6 million each year is to support and strengthen law enforcement training and implement best practices, period. That's the bill. If we intend to change and reform the post board with training that, to Senator Ralph's point, works, 3 lines, if that, is not going to do it. Mr. President and members, let's have the debate on the merits of what needs to be that training and that best practice, because $6 million is not going to solve it. The language matters, and the bill that Senator Torres Ray is presenting is talking about what the community wants to see in the training and best practice. So we're here to, and I actually was looking at all the bills that we introduced. One of them is 3 sentences, the one we just talked about. One of them is 4 sentences. Another one is 2 paragraphs. Another one is just one section. If that's going to be the reform that's going to bring justice to the killing of George Floyd, I am sorry. You can go to bed in peace, but I will not. This is a travesty of this procedure, of what we're doing today here in special session, of what brought us here. So members, if you don't want to debate a bill, just vote against it. But this is the time we have. We had an informational, no amendments allowed. That's what the public got, an informational hearing on these bills. This is a disgrace, and I'm going to call it out because this is an injustice to this procedure. So members, go ahead with your motions to call something ungermane or germane or whatnot. Play the political games that people are tired of hearing. You will reap the consequences in November because that's not what is expected of us in this time in Minnesota and in this chamber. So Senator Limmer, maybe you can find something there that you would like that would be something appropriate to something that your caucus would support. But don't shut the debate down and stop shutting us down. We may be wearing masks, but we're not going to be quiet. So members, please vote your conscience in the next remaining bills, or maybe we'll get out of here pretty quickly because all we're going to have is a few bills of not real reform. And for the record, I stand for public safety. I'm the chief author of a bill to fund a public safety training facility in my district, which thank you for including that, and apparently that's not controversial. I want our law enforcement to have what they need, the right training, the right resources, but just throwing money with a blank check without telling them how to spend it and the reforms that we need so that another George Floyd does not happen here or anywhere is what we need. So I'm not going to stand here for the duration of this proceeding and not call that out. So keep asking for your point of germaneness, but I'm not buying it, and neither is the public. So hopefully, Mr. President, you take that into consideration, but I somehow know the ruling of this particular point of order. Thank you.
Members, just a reminder, we're not discussing the merits of the amendment or the bill at this point in time. We are discussing the point of order on germaneness. Further advice to the President, Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to the issue of whether you should take this point well taken or not. I'm asking you to find that the Benson articulated motion is not well taken. Mr. President, I will go at it from this perspective. When you look at the language in subdivision 4 of Senate file number 1, it articulates exactly what Senator Franzen stated, which it says how much money is going to be allocated each year. What Senator Patricia Torres-Ray's motion does is it just clearly articulates what are some of the trainings that should be offered by the Post Board for this $6 million. Analogous to this is, let's consider a trail. If this said $6 million should be used each year for trails in the state of Minnesota, and then someone stands and says, hey, I think the bill should say, here are the trails that should be considered for the $6 million. We've done it. It would be appropriate. We see it at all times. And so here in this situation, I ask Mr. President that you find the Benson motion not well taken. Here's the last thing that I'll say, because I think it's important to understand, and I hear you, Mr. President, as you continue to try to bifurcate that we're arguing only the motion around whether this motion, whether it's germane, the offering was germane or not. The reason why that doesn't quite feel right is because we can clearly see here that her point of order should not be well taken because it speaks to the underlining Senate file number 1. And had other individuals been consulted or talked to or were part of the discussion, we might not have to sit on the floor today and bring forth amendments in hopes that we could have that debate today. But, Mr. President, I hope that you find the Benson motion not well taken because this is germane. Thank you, Mr. President.
Any further advice on the point of order motion? I rule that the point of order is well taken and the amendment is not germane. Senator Hayden.
Mr. President, I challenge the ruling of the president and ask for a roll call.
Senator Hayden has challenged the ruling of the president. The question before the body is, shall the decision of the president be the judgment of the Senate? A green vote is in favor of the judgment of the president, and a red vote is against the judgment of the president. The secretary will take the roll. Members in the retiring room, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in the retiring room. Members in room 303, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in the president's office, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 323, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in room 237, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 206, please come to the chamber to vote. I will now call on Senator Kent to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report no for Senator Carlson.
Senator Carlson votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Clausen.
Senator Clausen votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Eaton.
Senator Eaton votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Lane.
Senator Lane votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Latz.
Senator Latz votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Newton.
Senator Newton votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Rest.
Senator Rest votes no. Senator Kent.
I report no for Senator Wickland.
Senator Wickland votes no. I'll now call on Senator Jasinski to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Gazelka votes aye.
Senator Gazelka votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Jensen votes aye.
Senator Jensen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes aye.
Senator Lang votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Newman votes aye.
Senator Newman votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Senjum votes aye.
Senator Senjum votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Nelson votes aye.
Senator Nelson votes aye. All members having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 35 ayes and 31 nays, the motion prevails and the ruling of the President is sustained. Members, we are back on Senate File 1 as amended. Senator Hur.
Mr. President, I hope that all the amendments that we present forward are not brought up to the condition of germaneness, because what is right is right. And many times, the majority would always claim that whatever they say is right, and whatever the minority say is right, but it also be defined as wrong, and that's is where the root of injustice began. But earlier I did present an amendment and have make some changes so that it could go through without the germane condition. I break my bills into two parts, into two amendments, as a matter of fact. And let me present you with the first amendment here is Amendment A26.
Senator Hur offers the A26 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Hur moves to amend Senate File Number 1 as follows. Page 1 before line 6, insert. This is the A26 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Hur.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment talk about mental health, crisis intervention, mental health illness crisis training, that officers should have minimum 4 hours for such trainings. And they're also set in this amendment the budget allocation for both mental health and autism. Studies show that people with mental health are 16 times likely to be killed by police officer. 16 times. So this bill, it's important that we include this bill into the Senate File 1 so that we could have our officer be well trained and understand the nature of people that are suffering from mental health. And also it elaborate about understanding of multicultural, technique for crisis de-escalation, and so forth. So, Mr. President and Senator Limmer, I hope that you will support this amendment.
Discussion on the A26 amendment. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. In reading this amendment, we're taking out $600,000 out of the allocation that we've been making over the past couple of years, which is 10% of that allocation. So I imagine that is cutting into what has been budgeted over the years and the training curriculum that's been built up. And I'm wondering for that $600,000, what exactly we get. So, Mr. President, would you ask Senator Herr if he would yield for question?
Senator Herr will yield. Senator Johnson.
In Senate File 81, that you had dropped earlier this special session, Senator Herr, there wasn't an appropriation. I imagine since that time, you've been able to fill in the details then of what those appropriations are going to be doing and exactly what our $600,000 will provide. Could you elaborate on that $600,000 that will be coming out of that appropriation?
Senator Herr.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Thank you, Mr. President. That will be referred to Section 4. $200,000 will be appropriate from general fund to Peace Officer Center, the Post Board. It's a reimbursement for crisis intervention and mental illness training. And then Section 5, which is another $200,000, is appropriate from general fund also to the Post Board to administer a pilot program to create a collaboration between county mobile crisis mental health service. And then Section 6 is another $200,000 appropriate from general fund to Post Board also. That implement to the Post Board also for provision in Section 3. Yeah. Mr. President, it seems like I'm missing a page.
Senator Herr, the amendment I don't believe has a... The amendment doesn't have a Section 3, Senator Herr.
Mr. President,
Senator
yeah. Let me make an oral amendment just to cross out everything below line 4.23.
Senator Herr is making an oral amendment to the A26 amendment. Can you please restate your oral amendment, Senator Herr?
Mr. President, I want to make an oral amendment to remove everything after line point 23. Line point 23, I'd like to make an oral amendment to remove line point 23 to line point 25.
Senator Herr, are you removing Section 6, the appropriation section of the amendment? Is that what you're trying to accomplish?
That's correct, Mr. President.
Okay. The Secretary will report the oral amendment to the amendment.
Senator Herr moves to amend the original amendment as follows: delete Section 6.
So now, members, we're on the amendment to the amendment. That is what is in front of us. That's what's in front of the body right now. So discussion on the amendment to the amendment. Any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Opposed, say no. We will take a brief pause to gather the votes of members in alternate locations.
Two in the retiring room. He's got 5 yeses. Any noes?
Receiving a sufficient number of aye votes, the motion prevails and the amendment to the amendment is adopted. So now, members, we're back on the A26 amendment as amended. Discussion. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask Senator Hur to continue yielding.
Senator Hur, will you yield? Senator Hur will yield. Senator Johnson.
All right. Thank you very much for explaining what the money is used for. Now could we quantify a little bit about how many departments, how many officers, how many people are actually going to be trained using this $200,000 appropriation in each of the section 4 and 5?
Senator Hur.
Mr. President, thank you for Senator Johnson asking me that question, but I'd like to withdraw because there's some missing page in this amendment, and so if I can ask for withdrawal and then later can respond to Senator Johnson's questions.
Senator Hur withdraws the A26 amendment. Members, we're back on Senate File 1 as amended. Senator Hur?
Oh, yeah.
Senator Dietzich? Sorry, you're confused. When you're standing at your desk with the microphone in your hand, I think that you want to speak. So right now we're on Senate File 1 as amended. Is there any further discussion? Senator Hur.
Mr. President, I have another section here, another amendment here, Amendment A27.
Senator Hur offers the A27 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Hur moves to amend Senate File 1 as follows, page 1 before line 6, insert. This is the A27 amendment.
To the amendment, Senator Hur.
Thank you, Mr. President. This amendment talks about warrior-style training, prohibited warrior-style training. All of us are one family under the state of Minnesota. And each of us here do know a police officer, have a friend who are a police officer, or have family members that are police officer. And I don't know about most of you, but I know those police officers that are acquainted to me, and they see that warrior-style training is not needed. Most cities already ban warrior-style training. This legislation here talk about banning warrior-style training and disallow third party to also pay for the training. Remember, senators, police officers now are referred to as peace officer. They're not warrior. They're not going to go out there and kill and shoot people. As it defined in this bill here, warrior-style training means training for police officer that teaches that self-preservation of an officer is an officer's highest priority, or that train peace officer to approach each interaction with a citizen as a threat. So we shouldn't embed our officer seeing every citizen as a threat. And therefore, I ask fellow Senator and Senator Limmer to accept my amendment to prohibit warrior-style training. Thank you.
Discussion on the A27 amendment. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. In reading the A27 amendment, the warrior-style training prohibited, I'm a little confused on when an officer, fearing for their life in a life and death decision, can actually defend themselves. Senator Herr, could you explain a little bit of when an officer can actually defend themselves against a potential threat?
Senator Herr, will you yield? Did you hear the question, Senator Herr? Senator Herr.
Mr. President and Senator, it's not every single case where an officer has to defend themselves. Most situation has to do with de-escalation the situation. And when you train an officer well in terms of building relationship and learn how to de-escalate the situation, that will be a better outcome. Of course, there will be circumstances at time when they call upon, and doesn't mean that the officer won't know how to handle without having this warrior-style training. They already have the proper understanding of how to handle a situation when the life is threatened.
Further discussion on the A27 amendment. Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. I want to be able to rise to support Senator Herr. And as you do quick Google searches about warrior-style training, it doesn't speak to them, as Senator Herr eloquently said, as a peace officer. It says that they're a warrior, that they have to treat as they go through being the peace officer to protect and serve a community, that they take a warrior's mentality to it. And so I think that is part of the issue. That is part of the problem of the culture. And then we have many other things that we'll talk about: where peace officers live, how they're trained, what do they look like, is there diversity in the ranks? But this is just a small thing. I think that there has been best practices that says that this should not be something that we should be training. Certainly this shouldn't be something that we should be paying for, and certainly this shouldn't be something that counts as their continuing education. And I will remind members that this is something that the community, that not only law enforcement administrators, but the community has suggested that. So I know that Senator Johnson is trying to get to the bottom of these things, but I hope that those answers for him are rhetorical. But if we want to kind of go through a line by line, piece by piece, we don't mind having that conversation here all night and all day. But I think in light of what we're trying to do here, what we would want to do is to really kind of get to the depth of this and this idea that police officers are being trained as warriors and not as peace officers, as someone that looks at me as an enemy combatant and not somebody in the community that they should work with. I think that we should stop that practice immediately, and that's why we should support Senator Hur's amendment.
Further discussion on the 827 amendment. I have Senator Champion followed by Senator Marty. Senator Champion.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise just to clarify something, Mr. President, that I heard. And it goes really to the heart of the matter. But I'm not sure, Mr. President, that our colleague really asked it in order to get a true answer, or whether our colleague was just asking the question to be provocative. Notwithstanding the intent, and I'm not questioning one's intent, I thought perhaps that I would try to clarify it as much as humanly possible. Even though I believe that we're going to get into this debate even a little more once we get to Senate File 104, where it talks about modification of the use of force. And just to be clear, the reason why this debate is very important, and I'm not sure if my colleague really was asking the question in order to get a real legitimate answer, is because I think it's important for us to understand that the amendment that I'm going to put forward modifies the conditions under which a police officer can legally use deadly force, from times when it's reasonable to when it's necessary. That's going to be key. Necessary. This change in language and the spirit of the meaning of when it's necessary really encourages de-escalation and other tools to be used in order to do what I believe that Senator Limmer spoke to, but yet the substance, unfortunately, of some of these bills doesn't speak to what I believe would be the depth of his appreciation for this area, which is sanctity of life. Because if we really do believe that every human being is valuable, and I believe that, Mr. President, Senator Limmer would agree with Psalms 139, where it says that a person is fearfully and wonderfully made, and that if we really do believe that and we just don't believe it on Sunday, that we would want every person to see the value of human life. And so when my good friend asked the question as to when, it should only be when it's necessary. Because we want a police officer to go home as we want the person that they're interacting with to go home as well. We're not suggesting that any particular life is greater than another. But we do believe that the spirit in which and the approach that is used in any given situation can be motivated by the things people see, the training they receive, and the lessons that they learn at home. If that wasn't true, Mr. President, we wouldn't speak so eloquently about the sort of games our children play and whether it sends forth a propensity for violence. We wouldn't blame rap music sometimes the way we do, because we say that if people are hearing things, it encourages them in ways that we don't want them to. And I don't believe that rap music does that, and I'm questionable on the games. But what I do know is that every human being is important, and that I believe that a police officer should only use force when it's necessary, by looking at the totality of the situation and not from fear, not out of fear, not out of dehumanizing another person, but looking at what is the need in the situation. Because we too value, believe it or not, in my Senate district, they value police officers because there are some good, but it's the bad ones that become the challenge. And all should be held accountable whenever they cross a line, because we all are held accountable when we cross a line. So, Mr. President, thank you for the opportunity to just clarify that. and speak to that question, and I stand ready, willing, and able to deal with it either biblically or legally.
Further discussion on the A27 amendment, Senator Marty, followed by Senator Ingebrigtsen. Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I think this is a very important issue that Senator Herr is bringing up, and I'd like to ask for a roll call.
A roll call has been requested. Roll call granted. Senator Marty.
I want to mention two things, one of which is February of last year, Florida State University released a study on two distinct approaches to policing, the, quote, warrior approach and the guardian approach. They actually pulled together, they created a model to measure the differences between two distinct approaches to policing. What they found, they were officers in the test, in the model, were asked, provided a hypothetical scenario of a suspicious person walking in a park at night and asked how they would respond. The team found out that the warrior and the guardian models are two distinct approaches to policing. Officers were able to adopt both mentalities. They also found officers who scored higher on the guardian measure were more likely to value communication, while higher scores on the warrior measure revealed greater importance of physical control and more favorable attitudes toward excessive use of force. That's their wording, excessive use of force, which is, I think, the whole reason we're talking about all of this today. McLean said, the author said, the warrior mentality often leads to use of more force, making it more likely that the officer or the citizen gets injured. So that study suggests there's a real powerful argument for why we want to ban this warrior training. And I was paying attention to this several years ago after the tragedy, the killing of Philando Castile, because the officer in that case had been through the bulletproof warrior training. And not just taking academic researchers and so on, but the head of the executive director of the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, in other words, this institute, this association of directors of groups like our Post Board, Michael Bekar, was quoted at the time after the Philando Castile killing. He said, police training became very militaristic and caused a lot of problems that are going on in the nation, said Michael Bekar, who's the head of that Peace Officer Standards and Training Association. He said everything they were doing made the police officers very paranoid, Bekar said. At some point, they wouldn't even stop a car without 3 backups. And I think the point of this whole thing is we've had killings in Minnesota by police officers who have been through this training, and this training, according to the researchers, leads to more likely use of excessive force. And the head of a law enforcement training association says it makes officers paranoid. I think a whole lot of us in this room, myself included, would not be a good peace officer. You have to have the right mentality and everything else because you're in very dangerous settings. But the idea that we want people to be trained to be shoot first and ask questions later, or if you don't shoot first, you might not be going home safely tonight. Yes, we understand they're at high-risk positions and they are going to have times where they use deadly force. But the idea that we are actually training them to be afraid, training them, according to a law enforcement training executive, to be paranoid, suggests how harmful, how evil this type of training is for the people who are supposed to be public safety officers, or as Senator Torres-Ray or somebody said, peace officers. Senator Herr, I think, may have said that. They're peace officers, not warriors. We want to make sure our folks are trained appropriately. I think Senator Herr's amendment is critically important. It speaks very definitely to what's happened in Minnesota, and I urge your support.
Further discussion on the amendment, Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I've been listening to the discussion today, and some of it has been, I think, productive, some not so productive. And as a member of the Senate as many years as I've been here, I know by the end of the day cooler heads are going to prevail. However, I did hear some comments today that are troublesome to me and we should all be concerned about. I believe we've talked very clearly about the sanctity of life. Senator Champion just mentioned that, and I know Chair Limmer's been moving forward, and we've mentioned it several times that in police training, the sanctity of life should certainly be paramount. However, really? Well, of course it should be paramount. Of course it should be. And 99 9/10% of the time, it is. We have to be very careful when we move through these bills here. It's quite insulting to read some of the things here, and here's some of these comments. Not so much to me anymore, but to the officers that are out there that are doing the job that nobody in this room wants to do or ever would want to do. In fact, I think before too long, there isn't going to be many that are going to want to do. And when that happens, members, this is quite frankly a walk in the park compared to what we're going to be dealing with if we don't have those people that want to be law enforcement officers, want to serve, that really care about life. When you talk about warrior training, Senator Hayden, it's not the culture of cops. It is not the culture of cops to be a warrior. However, I will say that as I've been watching the media lately, they had better be trained on some kind of a procedure to be able to defend themselves, because there's an awful lot of rocks that are being thrown, a lot of feces bags that have been thrown, a lot of other stuff that's been thrown I'm not even going to mention. In fact, they have to be trained for both. And if they aren't trained for both warrior and guardian, frankly, nobody's going to go home. And we don't want that. So if you're going to support this kind of attitude in this bill, and I don't like the word warrior. I don't like that. I don't think there's anybody out there that likes that. If somebody's selling that out there, what it basically means is self-defense tactics, not offensive tactics. Police have offensive tactics if they want to use it. And in some cases, they have. And it was very clear that one overused that here, and actually 4 did. And guess what? There's a mechanism in place to deal with that, because all 4 of them, except I believe 1, are still locked up. And they're charged with murder or accessory to murder. So let's be very careful when we move through here. When you cross the line, I know Bobby Joe, you mentioned that, Bobby Joe Champion, you mentioned crossing the line. And you're right. If anybody does that, and when they do that, they have to answer for it. No question. No question about it. So folks, let's move ahead with clear heads. Senator Limmer has told you, and you know how deliberative he is and how sincere he is when he says that he will continue to work on these issues moving forward and what's going to be best for all of Minnesota, cops included, people that call upon cops. Can the cops do better? Frankly, I think in majority of the places, I know they are. Minneapolis, maybe not so much. I talked about this earlier. Maybe this is a Minneapolis problem. It isn't a problem that I've had out in my area. Folks, we have to be very careful. But again, I thank you for the very good discussion that's going on, but I would oppose this amendment.
Further discussion on the A27 amendment, Senator Champion.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Mr. President, there are certain words that we use in this chamber and that my good friend, Senator Ingebrigtsen just used that I think that we should be very careful. I believe that he means well, but often we do talk from our own perspective and we don't stop to think about the perspective of another. And if we are supposed to really be united and as one, I believe that this saying is correct. It says that, that one should seek to understand, then to be understood. Too often, we have people who say, oh, it's a Minneapolis problem. I don't have that problem up in my area. But the only people that they've talked to have been people who look like them. They may have never talked to a person of color who might live down the block. I remember, even though I wasn't old enough, I look at old footage. I look at things from 1963 and prior to 1963, when there were peaceful marches done by Martin Luther King Jr. and others. And today we quote Martin Luther King all the time. But we never stopped to think about that in 1963, even when children were marching because of injustices, that dogs were sicked on them and that police were beating them upside their head. And water hoses were sprayed on them. And like the situation we are faced today, it pricked the consciousness of America because we got a chance to see in real time what was truly happening because other people were denying the reality of the people who lived there in the South. The problem is that mentality doesn't just stay in the South. It doesn't just stay in metropolitan areas because a large percentage of the people who are police officers, even on the Minneapolis Police Department force, don't live in Minneapolis. They live out where my good friend Senator Ingebrigtsen lives and other people live. But they don't live in the city of Minneapolis because, as my understanding, is less than 7% that lives even around the city of Minneapolis. Where'd they learn it from? This is not the point blame because we do at all times want every individual to go forward. And it's also interesting to me how, Mr. President, Senator Ingebrigtsen says, oh, words matter. But then when we look up the training, it says warrior training. Senator Marty outlines that there's a website. There's a place they go. That's how it's being marketed. But he says, oh, it shouldn't be named that, but it is. And there's a negative connotation that goes with that. And that negative connotation and mentality and that culture affects people who looks different from the individuals who make up our police forces. And so I would just hope that even as we think about Senator Limmer is a wonderful person. But I think, Mr. President, that the proposals that have been put forward haven't really been thoughtful enough in order to consider people like me. I don't recall getting a call asking me my thoughts or my opinions about the different perspectives. I think I'm a reasonable person. I remember saying to one of my close colleagues today that it's equivalent for all men to come together and say what they think should happen for women, and that we should decide what should happen with a woman's body. I don't think that's right. I don't think men should do that. I think women are capable and qualified to speak for themselves. And if we're going to even remotely think about participating in a conversation, we should defer and listen to a woman. And in this instance, I believe it's important for folks to defer and listen to other people of color. We may agree, we may not agree, but that's a part of having rich discussion so there can be an exchange of ideas and the opportunity to learn from each other, because perhaps I would learn something from something they share with me. because I'm always open to that. So, Mr. President, I just hope that as we continue this debate, that we allow for it to be real debate, because we didn't get a chance to debate these issues, but these have been bills that have been introduced and has been on the roster, and that there's been hearing requests made, and unfortunately we are here. But we can do something still that would be meaningful, that would be substantive, and that would be thoughtful and beneficial to all of us as Minnesotans. Because when we all do better, we all do better.
All right, members, I have a lengthy list. Next on the list is Senator Herr, followed by Senator Limmer. Senator Herr.
Thank you, Mr. President. I should be angry, actually very, very angry. You know, although I have a mild manner, I've been through a lot in my life. And when there was protests outside, which I joined protests outside about 2 weeks ago, seeking justice for George Floyd, I was in tears. And people may say that why am I crying for a black man's death? And I brought up the fact that folks in my culture face the same police brutality. And then I've been asked, am I just crying for my Hmong fella? I said, no, I didn't. My tear was for humanity and for the poor who cannot find justice. I see so many young men that I know that are killed by the hand of police in this country that call freedom. Just recently, it's through warrior training that a Hmong man had a dispute, and Minneapolis force show up at his house, shot 100 rounds, killing him. That's on the newspaper. And it was not long ago when a friend that I know was pushed off the bridge. There's no evidence of that how he fell off the bridge. All that because the mentality of warrior. The mentality of warrior when kill a young man, Fong Lee, behind a school backyard, and then feel guilty of it. How you feel guilty when you're a warrior? You feel guilty. How are you going to justify it? You plant a gun into his shirt. And that's my scenario. It was warrior style training, and this is probably before they come out with the term warrior style. But 2 young men in Inver Grove Heights, I should say their name, Pasi Lo and Tang Yang. Yes, they did steal a car. They were in the wood hiding. A police officer shot them in the back because they were dehumanized. I think that part kicked in as their warrior. And Bruce Tang Tao too, shot from the back, where they already been arrested, but still shot in the back because of their superiority complex or mentality of warrior. And this is just a few stories that I want to share. And my tear in the state capitol for humanity and for those who are poor and lack of support. And I'm not saying that all cops are bad. This bill, this amendment here, is not to fence all cops. This is to fence the bad cop, the bad apples that are going to use excessive force to our vulnerable victim who also a member of our disability, mental health, or autism. And as I said earlier, many cities already banned the warrior-style training. This language here talk about that, but also talk about banning third party who may want to fund someone else to train the warrior style. So thank you for all your comments. And I'd like to have a question for my good friend, also Senator Ingebrigtsen, too. You being a police officer for years, and my respect to you. I always have high respect for those who are in service, whether it's in military or law enforcement. With your years of service, how do you approach a citizen when called upon, Senator Ingebrigtsen?
Senator Her, are you asking Senator Ingebrigtsen to yield?
Yes, sorry, Mr. President.
Senator Ingebrigtsen will yield. Please,
yep.
please restate your question, Senator
Her. Senator Ingebrigtsen, how do you approach citizen when you're on duty as a police officer and in your years of law enforcement?
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Mr. President, Mr. President, thank you, Senator Her, and my good friend, I should say, that I've been acquainted with for some years, and we've worked on some issues together, and we haven't gone out for dinner yet, but you've promised that, and we're going to make that happen here pretty soon. But the question is how do I approach the general public when I was on in law enforcement? And folks, I would expect that it'll probably be something that you would answer yourselves in the same manner, is that I would treat that person the way I would want to be treated. I would treat that person like it's my grandmother, or it's my son, or it's my loved one. That's how I would approach it. But not all those approaches end up as you would like them to be. You just need to understand, I think, folks, that cops don't get up in the morning and tally up themselves as to how many people they can go out and brutalize and beat or kill. They just don't do that. And I don't think that's the conversation here going on. It's tilting aloft that way, but I'm just here to tell you that is not the cop in the Midwest. It might be the cop in New York, it might be the cop in other parts of the country, but cop leaders have been coming to the Midwest, Senator Her, for many years to get their policemen, to solicit policemen because of our honesty and because of our hard work ethic. And in general, you are in the best country, best area of the United States when it comes to law enforcement. And I'll proudly stand and say that every day. However, there are going to be issues that don't turn out very well. That's what we hire those people to do, is to confront those issues. And yes, sometimes they turn out very tragic. And they turn out tragic both ways. I buried actually, I've said this before, and I don't have to say it anymore, but 6 months after I was best man in the wedding, I actually carried that same officer down that same aisle in a coffin. So I've been there. I've seen that. Have I seen it many times? No, I haven't, but I've been fairly close to it off and on. But in general, to your answer, that was a long answer, and I apologize, folks, because we really need to get moving along here. But I would treat everybody the way I would want to be treated, and that's how I would start my contact. But that isn't necessarily going to happen. Isn't necessarily going to go that way, but 99 9/10% of the time, it ends up good. Or at least I hope it does. And if it doesn't end up good, if it happens to be in an area which is very clear to me where there seems to be a problem in this state, then it needs to be dealt with there. It needs to be dealt with there. And I'm going to repeat that several times, and I don't want to belabor it, but that's where it's broken and it needs to be looked at. Thank you.
Members, we're on the A27 amendment. Senator Her.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm just going to say make one last comment here, and then ask for a roll call for this amendment. But I appreciate Senator Ingebrigtsen, good man, good cop. But I appreciate his answer too, that he didn't mention about warrior style training. And again, my point is that most cities don't see the needs for warrior style training anymore. So I ask for your support, everyone.
And Senator Hurd, thank you for reminding the chamber the amendment that we're on is the 827 amendment. I have Senator Hayden, who looks like he's deferring to Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me express also my regard and respect for Senator Ingebrigtsen for his public service and his efforts through a long, illustrious career to keep his community safe. And I would hope that every police encounters the public in the manner in which he described that he would as well. But what we're debating in front of us is warrior-style training. And I'll just read a couple of observations and comments that show us that even though Senator Ingebrigtsen believes that this kind of mentality and mindset and training keeps cops more safe and may keep the public more safe, in fact, has the counterintuitive and paradoxical result in keeping everyone less safe. And I'll just also start off by saying that I think most are familiar with the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which is the study and commission that came together after some of the very highly publicized police officer-involved deaths and murders of black men across the country that President Obama pulled together. And it really become one of the bedrock foundational documents giving us guidance on how to go about transforming public safety and policing in our society. And the 6 pillars that it's built upon are building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology, social media, community policing, crime reduction, training, education, officer wellness, and safety. On building trust and legitimacy, their number one recommendation is for police to adopt the mindset of guardian and dispense with the mindset of warrior. And unfortunately, the warrior training does cause police to mutate into the warrior mentality, which means that they're taught that officers need to learn to be afraid, that every encounter could be one that's fraught with the possibility of death. For warriors, hypervigilance offers the best chance for survival. To treat every individual they interact with as an armed threat and every situation as a deadly force encounter in the making. Every individual, every situation, no exceptions. Because the enemy's identities are unknown, everyone is a threat until conclusively proven otherwise. So imagine that, driving around our community and viewing everyone you see as the enemy, because that's what the warriors with the warrior mentality do. Because everyone they meet may have a plan to kill them. Counterintuitively, the warrior mentality also makes policing less safe for both officers and civilians. Even acting friendly, officers may be told, can make them a target. And in fact, intelligent policing means that police use communication, relationship building, and tactical strategies to create avoidable risks and not go and create risks and create tension and create violence where perhaps there may not be any. To approach every situation to minimize the threat rather than having it turn violent in the first place. And a great example is when an officer, a solitary officer, has to give chase to a suspect, and rather than actually approaching that suspect in an aggressive manner, those who aren't trained in the warrior way are taught to keep that person in their eyesight until a situation can be found to bring that person to resolve the conflict and to resolve the situation, maybe bring more officers into the situation. Tactical restraint is a valuable concept precisely because it offers a principled way to broadly apply the lessons that officers have already learned in some context, to reduce both the probability of resistance and the amount of force that may be necessary to overcome that resistance. So we're talking, members, about keeping everyone more safe, including officers. Warrior training doesn't do that. It has the paradoxical effect of reducing safety for everyone involved. That's what we're interested in. That's why Senator Hur is offering this amendment. Thank you.
Next, I have Senator Hayden, followed by Senator Isaacson. Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I think a lot has been said, and I was immediately raised my hand when Senator Engelbretson referred to me, but I won't fall for that trick many more times, hopefully, but you know how it works around here. I just wanted to make a few comments, Mr. President, and one was, Senator Engelbretson talks about, well, in his, he doesn't know many people that fall into this category, and that this may only be a problem in just Minneapolis. Well, what I do know is that the Judiciary Committee and others, and of course Senator Engelbretson is a seasoned retired former sheriff who we all have said that we respect around here. This is a state in which we should be looking out for the whole state. We should be not just saying, oh, that's their problem, the state of Minneapolis or the state of St. Paul. Minneapolis is in the state of Minnesota. And so if there was a problem and you're in the fraternity of law enforcement officers, it would seem to me that if you identified that problem, you would have, Senator Engelbretson, started to deal with that issue. If you said that you don't believe that it's really warrior training, then you should have started out and said, well, let's change that. Let's get rid of that stigma of a warrior and let's talk about what it really is. But that didn't happen. And the majority that runs this body, that didn't happen. And the majorities in which chairs have the ability to say what is going to be on the docket and what the conversation is going to be and where we're going to spend our resources, that didn't happen. So even after this tragic event that has all brought us here, has now got us focused in the middle of a special session, in the middle of a pandemic, bringing us together, we didn't have that conversation. There wasn't a Zoom call, Senator Champion, I don't know, or a Zoom call, Senator Disick, that said, well, let's get together and have this conversation and figure out what we can put together, and let's change and let's figure out what the name of this training is and get rid of it if it's going to put a stain on the folks that do it, because that's not what it is. Or, hey, maybe I need to take a little bit of more of an interest in where you live at or what part of the state that you live at. Maybe I need to figure out what really happened, as we're trying to figure out with George Floyd and Jamar Clark and Philando Castile. Maybe the Midwest of Minnesota isn't as exceptional as Senator Engelbretson thinks that it is. That's a problem around here. We often think that somehow Minnesota is so exceptional, that somehow Mississippi or New York or California is the problem. Well, we might be in denial, and I think we are. So I would ask the members of this body, and especially those that somehow think that those things don't happen here, is to just Google it. Just say, look, how many times has this happened? How much money have we paid out through the taxpayer dollars on police brutality and misconduct? I think you'd be surprised. Even I was surprised, and I'm in the middle of it. I think you'd be surprised. So I just think that this is very simple, and it's drug on for a while, but this is very simple. Senator Hur, in a very humble, simple way, just said, listen, there's empirical evidence. My colleagues have come forward to read you 21st century this and all of the studies that simply said, that's not the way to go. Let's do it a different way. The community is saying, hey, talk to us, send some of that money to us, and we'll help you work with a community precinct model. We started out with Senator Ralph saying that it's working in St. Cloud. I think Chief Blair Anderson probably is working with the community pretty well. Seems like he's got a good relationship with the NAACP, and I'm sure other advocacy groups. So why don't we take the first step? Let's not make this so hard, so arduous. Let's not dig in so fast and so hard. Let's get our feet out of the sand and out of the cement and say, listen, that's probably not the right thing to do. It makes good sense for us. And then let's move forward and get to the substance of this. Let's start figuring out what we need to do to make policing better. Let's highlight those good law enforcement officers who say they go to work each and every day, and then let's root out the ones that are not, and let's not turn those that started out good and then give them so much training, give them $6 million worth of more so that they can take that training and then turn out to be somebody who they don't even know themselves when they look in the mirror. So let's just move forward. Let's pass one amendment on one bill. We got 4 more to go, and let's get to it in this state Senate, and let's move forward. And I would just urge my members not to fight so hard on things that seem to be so common sense, and pass Senator Hur's amendment.
Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm trying to imagine someone at home maybe tuning into this as we had the little mix-up with the amendment, and I stepped back and I got to listen to a little bit in the other room where I'm sitting. And I know this is not, let me be very clear, I don't know this is not how Senator Ingebrigtsen meant for this to come across. But I don't think in the history of all the arguments and discussions I've ever heard about the police that the concern was they're not violent enough, right? I've never heard someone say, well, they need more training to have more chance of defending themselves. They need more of an upper hand in the way that they're going to police. I've had many friends who are police officers, and the training they get on how to conduct themselves in a violent situation is quite complete. And when you have something that has the warrior mentality concept, I don't think that is adding to the idea of a peace officer. Does that mean there aren't dicey situations, and am I grateful that they're there? 100%. I am, right? But let's go back to something Senator Ingebrigtsen said that I think is really important. 99.5 of these people are in really good shape. They're good people. They're not doing the problems. We're overstating it. Yet people are still dying. George Floyd still died. How many others have we had here in the Minneapolis area just recently? You're right. Both things can be true. Cops are good people, most of them are good eggs, and people are still dying. If that's the case, then the status quo is not working. This is a situation where 99% isn't good enough. It just isn't. And people ask me, as I've gone through my own trying to become more self-aware and understand what white privilege is and that kind of stuff, what's your experience been with the police? Well, my experience has been fabulous. I'm a white guy in the suburbs. Just going to say it. My experience has been fabulous. But it turns out that my experience may not be the norm. And a lot of my friends who are white don't quite understand that sometimes. And that's a concern that I have. I'm not saying it's anybody here, but in general, we have this discussion. Sometimes I find that when racism is, and we're dealing with these kind of concepts, we struggle to see past our own experience. But when I talk to constituents, and I want to give you one really good example, I had a constituent on one of the nights of the protests that had to get her daughter, an African-American constituent, had to get her daughter to this one specific hospital that could treat her based on the experience and what the nurses were telling her and how soon she had to be there. And she was too afraid to go down there because she knew what was going on, a lot of unrest, not the police's fault, but she didn't know if being in a situation like that would be healthy for her. She couldn't afford to be stopped. She had to get her kid there right away, and she called me for help, right? Let me be clear, whether perceived or real, the fact that that person felt uncomfortable driving the streets to get there out of concern for their own well-being in a heightened situation, granted, is unacceptable. It's not just enough for us to say racism isn't bad. We have to be saying we're anti-racist. It's not just enough to sit there and go down the road of just saying, well, I'm not like that. You have to be working to dismantle it. And that's part of what I am so proud of what I have seen with my friends in this caucus, talking about pushing forward agendas, speaking passionately about it, and I support them 100%. And this is just one of the many examples of how we can apply ourselves in a way that's beneficial. Because what we don't do very well, the people that are in the majority of the norm, is we don't listen very well. My friends who are of color in my caucus came forward saying this is a really good idea and how we can solve the problem. I'm going to listen. This white guy is going to listen. So I hope that people will think about what Senator Hur is talking about and maybe pass his amendment. Thank you.
Further discussion on the A27 amendment, Senator Torres Ray.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. I just wanted to read a number to you members because I think Senator Ingebrigtsen alluded to the fact that these cases may only happen in Minneapolis. And I want to tell you that in the state of Minnesota, we had in the last few years 933 payouts to citizens for alleged misconduct of police officers. That's almost 1,000 cases. Over 90% of those cases involved misconduct against Black and Latino people. And many of these payouts were done to families that actually live in Eagan, Brooklyn Park, and other suburban areas. I encourage you to look at the numbers that we have, at the statistics, so that you understand that this is not happening in Minneapolis only. As a matter of fact, the majority of the cases in suburban communities only involved African American people and Latinos.
Further discussion on the A27 amendment, Senator Senjum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, I was across the street, but wanted to come over here and speak to this. Senator Hur, I know where your heart is, and as I look at the amendment that you had offered us today, if it was to prevent, I'll just say, Rambo kind of training within the spectrum of police training activities, I would say I'm right on, I'm right with you. But then I read the amendment, and I think of if my son or my daughter was a police officer, or thinking about even going into it. And I would want that son or daughter to go into it with some level of training that self-preservation is pretty important. You think of a wife or a husband of a police officer walking out the door every morning. I think that wife or husband of that police officer walking out the door wants that police officer to come home that night. He's got to think about self-preservation. He's got to be trained with that attitude in mind. This amendment, as I said, if it was a Rambo kind of amendment, I'd be right with you. But this says we shouldn't train officers to preserve their own life. And I don't think that's where we want to go. Likewise, and I've been, maybe all of us have to some degree, did ride-arounds with police officers. The second part of this where it says that the trains police officer to approach each interaction with citizens as a threat or potential threat. I tell you what, when I walked around, when I did ride-arounds in Rochester, a simple traffic stop, get out of the car and walk up to the side of that vehicle with that officer. You don't know what's in that vehicle. You don't know what the reaction of that individual in that car is going to be. That officer has to at least approach it initially with a potential effect, with a potential that there's something in there that's going to threaten that officer. And we have to, I think, train them in that respect. We just have to. I think you all know as police officers approach that window, they always sort of kind of lean towards the back door a little bit so that somebody can't swing around and shoot them or do something like that. They do protect themselves, and we have to train them in that respect. Likewise, on a certain ride around, it was the radio, the police car came forth, and there was a warrant for some arrest. And so, okay, we go over to this house. Drive in the driveway, and the officer gets out, and I'm kind of sitting in the front seat because I don't have a vest on, I don't have a pistol on. And he says, "Aren't you getting out?" You walk up to the front door of that house. You don't know what's coming through that front door. You don't know if that door opens, what's going to come out. So I think we have to. I think, Senator Hur, your amendment is really well intended in terms of we don't want our police officers to be Rambo-style trained. Of course we don't. But I don't think we can take the training away that's essential for a standpoint of the life preservation of that officer. Or when he approaches, even myself, I would hope that he would think about even me as a potential threat from the standpoint of taking care of himself. I don't think we can take that away from an officer. Senator Ingebrigtsen said earlier, if we take life safety away from a police officer, I'm believing at some point in time we're not going to have police officers. And again, I would say, if you remember, it was all about Rambo-style training, forget it. I'm right with you, Senator Herr, but it's really not. It's about training the officer to take care of himself, to take care of being a father and a mother, might come home from work every day and enjoy their family. That's what it's about. And this amendment takes that away. So, Mr. President, members, I would oppose this amendment.
Further discussion on the 827 amendment, Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was kind of afraid that this conversation would go this way on a variety of bills tonight. We're getting into a pattern that I think it's real easy for us to fall into, and that is we think we know more about policing than the police do. A few years ago, back in the year 2000, we thought we knew more about home construction in this body than the home insulation scientists did. And so we thought if a little insulation is good, a lot of insulation is better. And we, in our own concept of looking at the problem, we created all sorts of regulations and rules, which ultimately caused all of the houses in the year 2000 and 2001 to mold out, causing billions of dollars of harm to our citizens. Now, with this discussion, we think we know more about policing and the rules of police training than the police do. We live in a very uncertain society. We have very violent offenders that live in urban areas. We have drug cartels that continue to bring drugs up right up to the center of the Midwestern part of our country, right up to the Canadian border. They are extremely well armed. We also have the threat of terrorism, also extremely well armed at times. And I would hope to think that we would make sure that our training of our law enforcement officers would be as complete as possible. And for that reason, I would urge our members to reject this amendment. I believe that police chiefs in their own separate jurisdiction can make this choice on their behalf, on behalf of their citizens, of what they want in their police department, reflecting the needs of their community. I think that's important to realize. Matter of fact, City of Minneapolis, they banned warrior-style training in 2019. It no longer is being used. It wasn't in effect prior to at the time of the George Floyd death. So I think it's best to keep things in local control. Police chiefs are under the authority of usually a mayor in the state of Minnesota. And if the mayor doesn't like it, if the city council doesn't like it, they can make that choice. I think we're getting a little far afield by making a choice for an entire state when we don't know the circumstances of what that threat is to their public in that jurisdiction. So therefore, Mr. President, I would urge the body to vote no.
Further discussion on the 827 amendment, Senator Marty.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't going to speak again, but I feel a need to respond to two things that Senator Senjum and Senator Limmer just said. Senator Senjum made the point he wants to make sure our police are properly trained and we shouldn't be stepping in the way of them protecting themselves. Again, this is a training that the head, not me, Senator Limmer, you said we shouldn't be trying to tell the police what kind of training they need. the head of the International Association of, I'm sorry, the name of the group, the International Association of Directors of Law Enforcement Standards and Training, the people who run groups like the Post Board, described it as caused a lot of problems that are going on in the nation. He's the one who said it makes officers paranoid. And that's the problem. Philando Castillo, who was killed in my district 4 years ago, he notified the officer, as I believe people with permits are often told, to tell the officer, I've got a gun. And bang, he was dead. And I'm sorry, but that's paranoia. You don't shoot first. When the head of a law enforcement training association says it makes officers paranoid, I have a feeling and I hope that the officer who shot him immediately, oh, what did I just do? But it's too late. We don't want people trained this way. When the head of an international law enforcement training association tells us this makes officers paranoid, and we have people dying from that, we got to recognize it. And Senator Senjum, I think you used the line, and I know you meant it lightheartedly, but you said, I would hope an officer is concerned with their safety, even with someone like me. And there's a difference, and it's pretty obvious to some of the people in this room, but not to me and lots of us perhaps. That's the color of the skin. You have to say, even somebody like me, if you're white. If you're Senator Champion, or Senator Hayden, or Senator Herr, or Senator Torres Ray, or Senator Franzen, the police do see you as a threat, no matter how innocent you are. And I think that's the simple problem we have to face. We've got to, Senator Limmer, we have to step in at a statewide basis because officers are getting this training, and they shouldn't be doing it if it makes them paranoid. And as that Florida State study said, makes them more likely to use excessive, they use the word excessive force. And we don't want a single officer in any of our departments using excessive force. We don't want any of them who are paranoid to be in law enforcement.
All right, members, we're on the A27 amendment. A roll call vote has been requested. A roll call vote will be taken after Senator Champion speaks. Senator
Mr. President, this will be brief. Just two things. One is this training that is being banned is only to make sure that individuals understand that the highest priority for an officer is one thing: preservation of life. We don't want the guiding mission to be of training to say that we need to make sure that you treat every person as if they're a threat or a danger. That hasn't worked for us. Albert Einstein says, if you keep doing the same thing and expect a different result, that's a form of insanity. I heard Senator Limmer when he said, namely, he remembers when this particular body stepped into the shoes of wanting to make sure that certain construction is happening and ended up, causing real problems. That may be true. But what is also true is that we do have some experience as people of color with the police, and our perspective should be a part of the equation. And that is what's missing in every one of your bills, and that's unfortunate because we were hoping to be partners and allies with each other to really be responsive. So we are asking for you not to support anything that would be problematic when we think in terms of warrior training, and to support the amendment that has been put forward by Senator Herr.
Senator Hayden.
Good. Well, thank you, Mr. President. And there was just a little piece of information that got passed out that I thought would be important. I know as I stepped off the floor, I thought I heard it was Senator Limmer, though it sounded like Senator Ralph over the microphone, but I think it was Senator Limmer that said that this should be a local control issue and that the local folks should be able to make the decision. And then Senator Ingebretson talked about Minneapolis. When Minneapolis, the mayor said we shouldn't do it. Said no more. And the president of the police union said, I don't care what that mayor has to say. Forget that mayor, I'm gonna still offer it. And we're gonna pay for it. We're gonna be in defiance of the elected official in Minneapolis, the elected executive, the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey. Bob Crow said, I'm not gonna do it. I'll do what I wanna do. He continues to say that kind of stuff. So there is a place for us to help support local elected officials, mayors and others that are saying, I'm looking at what's happening here. This happened April 24th, 2019. Interesting. Mayor of Minneapolis said, yeah, I don't think that's the right thing for my folks. The people of Minneapolis elected me. Police union chief said, well, I got a few guys elected me too. A few people elected me, and I'm not going to do what the mayor says, and I'm going to offer it. It's right here. So I just think that there is an opportunity and a time for us to be able to step in and say, you know what, doesn't seem like things are going that well, and that the local folks are saying that, and it's time to get some of these folks under control. It's time to get some of these it's time to get the paternalistic way of a police union, in this particular case, Bob Crow, and say, no, it's time for you to listen to your mayor, and it's time for us to step in to say that this isn't okay. So I just wanted to make sure members knew that as they decided to vote, and make sure that as Senator Limmer suggested that municipalities step in, they did, and often the rank and file didn't listen to them.
All right, members, we're on the A27 amendment. Senator Hur.
I just thought I'd make the last comment here in response to my good friend, Senator Senjum, that the Warrior Star training is not a Rambo training, but as a matter of fact, it is. And when you promote the warrior training, you're going to attract officers or folks coming through the academy mentality that we are out there to attack people or to put harm to people. As the definition I said earlier of the warrior style training is that trained peace officer approach each interaction with a citizen as a threat. That's a citizen, that's every citizen, and not all citizens pose a threat. And we are begetting so many officers into a warrior style training that almost like the stormtrooper of a fictional galaxy movie. And I think that we can do better, because warrior training is contradicting to the word of peace officer. And as I say earlier, that is banned in many parts of the country. As a matter of fact, throughout our country is banned warrior style training, and even St. Paul itself banned warrior style training. And the mayor of Minneapolis did ban warrior style training, so why can't we just accept this amendment? Thank you.
All right, members, we're on the A27 amendment. A roll call had been requested. Seeing no further discussion, the secretary will take the roll. Members in the retiring room, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 303, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in the president's office, please come to the chamber to vote. Members in room 323, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in room 237, please come to the chamber to vote. And members in room 206, please come to the chamber to vote. I'll now call on Senator Jasinski to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Jensen votes aye.
Senator Jensen votes aye. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Lang votes no.
Senator Lang votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Newman votes no.
Senator Newman votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Senjum votes no.
Senator Senjum votes no. Senator Jasinski.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Nelson votes no.
Senator Nelson votes no. Senator Jasinski, does that complete your votes? I'll now call on Senator Kent to report the votes of the members voting under Rule 40.7. Senator Kent.
Thank you, Mr. President. I report aye for Senator Carlson.
Senator Carlson votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Clausen.
Senator Clausen votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Eaton.
Senator Eaton votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Lane.
Senator Lane votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Latz.
Senator Latz votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Newton.
Senator Newton votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Rest.
Senator Rest votes aye. Senator Kent.
I report aye for Senator Wickland.
Senator Wickland votes aye. All members having voted who have the desire to vote, the Secretary will close the roll. There being 29 ayes and 37 nays, the motion has not prevailed. The amendment is not adopted. Members, we are back on Senate File 1 as amended. Further discussion on Senate File 1 as amended. The Secretary will give Senate File 1 Senator Herr. Senator Hur.
Mr. President, thank you. I have the amendment A29.
Senator Hur offers the A29 amendment. Senator Hur, we don't have an A29 amendment at the desk. Members, we're just waiting briefly for the amendment to get to the desk. Senator Hur offers the A29 amendment. The Secretary will report the amendment.
Senator Hur moves to amend Senate File Number 1 as follows. Page 1 before line 6, insert. This is the A29 amendment.
And members, I believe the amendment is posted online, and we are waiting for paper copies for anyone who would like a paper copy. In the meantime, we'll go to Senator Hur to explain the amendment. Senator Hur, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. President. The amendment I present is A29, and I think members already have it on their desks. It's talking about training requirement for mental health and cultural diversity, and also autism, and record keeping for those training as well, and then appropriation of the first $200,000 is from general fund to peace officer standard and training board to reimburse law enforcement agency crisis intervention and mental health illness crisis training expense that is provided and approved by entity according to our statute. The second appropriation is to administrate a pilot project to create collaboration between county mobile crisis mental health services. And the third appropriation is $200,000 appropriate from general fund to the post board for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2021 to implement Section 2. And earlier, it's the same language I had earlier, but we were missing a page. So this is a fresh amendment, and all the language should be intact. And so I stand for questions, or I would ask for your support, because as I say earlier, people with mental health are likely to be killed by police officers 16 times than the average number of casualty. So, member, I ask for your support.
Discussion on the A29 amendment. Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to say thank you to Senator Herr. There's a part that I want to particularly highlight in here. It's on autism training. I just can't stress enough how important this is. I've had the luxury and the joy of having many students who are on the spectrum with autism coming through Century and other schools I've taught at, and they've been engaged and involved. And when I talk to them, especially recently, I hear about this really present need to understand why it's so important we get this training for officers so they're equipped and ready to deal with the circumstances they're walking into if it's known that the person they're talking to or they're called on or they're having interaction with has autism. So I just really hope this is something that we can come together on. It's just so important in how we handle crisis and preventing further problems or violence or misunderstandings, and how an officer would approach someone with autism would be so much different in many ways than how they might approach a situation with someone who's not diagnosed. And this kind of intervention and de-escalation strategies you learn in this situation for these officers is going to be essential, and I think really can go a long way to preventing some of the horrible and traffic stories, and I won't go into them, but there are some really travesties of justice of folks who had autism. The officers didn't understand the situation. When they couldn't comply the way they wanted to, not understanding if it was a threat or not, they made the situation worse. So I hope with all earnestness that all of us can come together and support this amendment and understand the importance of autism training for police and bringing in autism experts and really giving the police officers what they need, the peace officers what they need to be successful in navigating the streets in this element. So thank you for bringing this amendment forward, Senator Herr, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Discussion on the A29 amendment. Senator Hayden.
Good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. I, too, rise to support Senator Herr's amendment. I know that I'd heard a couple of members say that we don't always know what it is to do this work. And someone, I think, Senator Limmer talked about how we make decisions not understanding what the ramifications are. Well, this is simply what this is doing. It's allowing police, law enforcement, and peace officers who may not be trained to identify people who have autism. Some of my friends who self-identify saying that they have autism said that it is a invisible or silent disability. You wouldn't know it because it's not something that they physically show. And so the ability for us to continue to train our peace officers on to identify this, and the compelling testimony we heard even in this body earlier today about a mother who lost her son because he had autism, and the law enforcement folks, if they knew better ways to treat that, he might still be alive today. So I know that this is really, really, really important, and there's too many interactions, encounters that I know more than has probably even been talked about, so I don't see why this common sense amendment wouldn't be something we would adopt.
Discussion on the A29 amendment. Senator Limmer. Oh, it looks like Senator Johnson would like to speak. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Would Senator Herr yield to question?
Senator Herr will yield. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I want to get back to the question I asked a little bit earlier. Under sections 4 and 5, and actually under section 6 as well, there's an appropriation for $200,000. Could we quantify what we get? I can see what it's paying for, but let's talk about the numbers of officers trained and how many officers will be trained, what departments will be using this. Are we going to be seeing it from mostly Metro County? Are we going to see it outstate? Could you please describe a little bit about what each of those $200,000, the number of officers and departments that will be trained? Thank you.
Senator Hurd.
Mr. President, as you can see, this is a pilot program on Section 5. It's a pilot program. We will not have the specific number of the exact officer training, but we want officers to be trained, and we want to test it out and make. I'm sure this will work, but we have to put it out there and try it out, and to see if we hope to carry it on further. Of a project that specify here appropriation to the 3 category here. Especially the second one is on Section 5 appropriation for appropriation for pilot project program is new, so I don't have the specific detail, but I would defer the answer to my colleague, Senator Dziedzic.
Senator Dziedzic.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I don't remember the specifics on earlier autism bills, but I believe, first of all, I'll go to Mr. Turner said this morning that the 2019 total training costs across the state were $43 million. And so the $9 million, that if we add this $6 million back in, is only about 20% reimbursement rate. So we are actually not fully reimbursing. And then when I had the earlier autism bills, and we've had a variety of them over the last few years, part of it was literally to go out because I got calls from, I believe, Monticello. We had calls from law enforcement across the state that was looking for some of this training, because this is not just a Minneapolis-St. Paul issue. So we had law enforcement across the state, and sometimes in some of those smaller communities, it is more challenging because you have less officers, and so it's harder to swap people out. And so some of this it varies depending on the department. When we looked at this, we had a lot of 100,000 in previous years for mental health and 100,000 for the crisis de-escalation. And so it is 200,000 is what we figured out and how many that they could actually train and how many they could do, but that made a good dent, at least in the autism portion. It made a really good dent in getting people across the state that wanted to take this training trained. I would also, would Senator Limmer yield?
Senator Limmer will yield. Senator Dziedzic.
Senator Limmer, on the original Senate File 1, do you know how many officers the $6 million is training in the original bill?
Senator Limmer.
Mr. President, Senator Dziedzic, the dollar amount that was created a few years ago was to supplement funding for supplement existing training budget dollars, and it was intended for every officer in the state of Minnesota.
Senator Dziedzic.
Thank you, Senator Limmer. So, Senator Johnson, I hope that gives you an idea that this $100,000 to $200,000 for each of these programs is a very small amount, but for these small programs, it can really make a difference. The autism program is, it's not in the current curriculum, but it is a huge growing need. I believe somebody said that we have some of the highest numbers of autism and rate of autism in the state, and so I think getting this training would really help officers deal with this situation so that people are treated fairly and we don't have people getting hurt just because they are not nonverbal. And so when the officer goes and asks them to respond, they're not nonverbal. And so you can't respond. They can't respond. And so how do you pick up, it helps the officers pick up cues so that they can understand what's happening and understand and learn how to calm people down. And so to me, it is a small part of this $6 million, but it'll go a long way in helping to train some of the officers that want to take these trainings across the state.
Further discussion on the A29 amendment. Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to raise a point of order.
Senator Johnson, please state your point of order.
I'd like to challenge the germaneness of this amendment under 35.2, where we are dealing with a substantially different issue. As you can see, the conversation has gotten quite complex on who this money is going to, how many people this is going to affect. We can see that all of a sudden we've got appropriations we weren't dealing with prior to that. And I think that we've gotten pretty far afield in this bill, where we're not only talking about the post board, but we're talking about the Commissioner of Human Services, mental health stakeholders. We're talking about a number of things in here, even regarding chemical dependency and different issues like that. So I think we've gotten far afield, and the subject of this A29 amendment has gotten substantially different than the underlying bill.
Senator Johnson raises a point of order on germaneness of the A29 amendment. Advice to the President. Senator Dietzich.
Thank you, Mr. President. So Rule 35.2 relates to says, number one, a substantially different subject. Well, this is training. The underlying bill is training. It's peace officer training. The Senator Herr's amendment goes for training, crisis intervention training. It goes for autism training, and then it goes for the mental health crisis cohort training. As I mentioned earlier, the original bill from 2017 that this is based off of, that Senator Limmer talked about earlier, the language in the bill actually says, part of the language in the bill says training in crisis response, conflict management, and cultural diversity, which is the exact same title of on line 1.4, training in crisis response, conflict management, and cultural diversity. So if it was part of the original package that the $6 million was based on, I think that it is all training, and it is peace officer training, and that's what this is. It is peace officer training. So I believe that it is germane.
Further advice, Senator Isaacson.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I'm a bit incredulous that we'd be playing this game again. Police officer training assistance, and Senator Herr's bill outlines what that police officer training assistance would be. It falls completely within exactly what the bill is asking to do. All we're saying is that we're going to outline what it is that money is going to be spent on. We're not adding new appropriation. We're spending the money that's already stated in the bill. So I cannot for the life of me understand how you could find this to not be germane when the bill is literally about police officer training, and Senator Herr's amendment simply just outlines what that training looks like within the guidelines of the bill and within the finances of the bill. What would be germane then, would be my question. At that point, if I wrote an amendment suggesting how we should do police officer training, would anything be germane? So I'm a little confused as to how this could not be germane when it so clearly falls under exactly what the bill is saying we're going to do. All we're doing is outlining more specifically what that might be. That doesn't make sense to me. So I'm not sure I understand how we're seeing this as a not germane bill. I hope you find this bill amendment to be germane. Thank you.
Further advice, Senator Hayden.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Senator Isaac said it the best. Now, I'm not sure if the bill author just simply thinks that what he writes is what we should do and that amendments aren't in order. But certainly if there is an amendment that is in order to this bill, Senator Isaacson said it the best, this bill or this amendment fits with this bill like a hand in a glove. And so we should we should find this germane. We should take the vote, and we should continue to move forward. Mr. President, that's my advice.
Further advice, Senator Dibble.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would encourage you to find Senator Johnson's request not taken in order. Mr. President, I can't say it better than Senator Hayden or Senator Isaacson. The whole point of an amendment is to further refine the subject that's in front of the body. We'll just read the language. $6 million each year is to support and strengthen law enforcement training and implement best practices. And if you look to the A29 amendment, we have training in crisis response, training in autism training, and crisis intervention training. Mr. President, this is as clearly germane as any amendment could possibly be. To say otherwise or to find otherwise would say several things. One is we have a majority that is simply afraid of having a full and fair discussion and to be put on the record on debating important policies that confront Minnesota and Minnesotans that they're asking us to do and to work on. And it would be a flagrant abuse of the rights of the minority to offer amendments to bills that are clearly germane and totally appropriate to the bill. I mean, I can't even believe that this is even in front of us. I've never seen a more germane amendment in my entire time as a senator. And Mr. President, I'll just close by saying we had a wonderful hearing and discussion on a bill brought forward by Senator Draheim to put a little indicia on driver's licenses for those who are autistic and those who have mental illness, for the very purpose of not creating unfortunate encounters between those who have autism and those who are mentally ill and the police. And this would fulfill that very robust and positive discussion we had on a bipartisan basis, and we supported that. But that's just a little index. This would give police the tools to know how to respond when they see that little indicia on a driver's license. This is a subject that's been broadly supported on a bipartisan basis. It's kind of the feel-good amendment of the year, somewhere where we can come together. Thank you, Mr. President.
Further advice? Senator Limmer.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know we're currently debating the germaneness. I kind of momentarily forgot that. I was going to get into the merits of the amendment, so I'm going to simply sit down.
Any further advice for the President? Senator Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, I'd like to withdraw my point of order, and I'll ask for a short recess.
Senator Johnson withdraws his point of order and asks for a recess, a very short recess to the call of the President, I guess, but a very short recess. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. Motion prevails. The Senate is in recess.